Hey, what is going on, guys? So we now have scientific evidence supporting the notion that vegans are superior in every way to vegetarians. Just kidding, but we will be discussing a new study whose aim was to uncover the similarities and differences between vegans and vegetarians and their motives for meat-free and plant-based diets. This is great because it isn't often we see studies like this comparing vegans and vegetarians. Usually it's meat eaters to vegans or vegetarians to meat eaters. As most of us vegans know, vegetarians can be a unique kind of irritating with respect to their lifestyle choices. This is because, unlike your typical meat eater, vegetarians can sometimes abstain from meat for ethical reasons. And they'll do this while still supporting the dairy and egg industry, two industries that still involve animal cruelty. And not only do they still involve animal cruelty, but some have even argued the cruelty in the dairy and egg industry can be worse than the cruelty in the meat industry. So to many vegans, vegetarians for ethical reasons can come across as worse to vegans than meat eaters. Basically because they're so close to being morally superior to everyone else like vegans, but they're not. I think it goes without saying that I won't be reading the entire study in this video, but I will be covering the parts I found interesting and the general findings. I will have the full paper linked in the pinned comment or description in case you want to give it a full read. I definitely think you should. It was very interesting. So when vegetarians and meat eaters have been investigated in the past for their motivations for eating less or no meat, it has consistently been shown that meat eaters tend to be more motivated by health, while vegetarians tend to be more strongly motivated by the environment and animal rights. These findings about vegetarians omitting meat for environmental and ethical reasons over health reasons are consistent with other studies showing that, like vegans, vegetarians are largely motivated by animal rights for refusing to consume meat products. With all of this in mind, the authors posed a question that many vegans have been asking for a long time about ethical vegetarians. If vegetarians and vegans share the same concerns about animal rights, why are not more vegetarians turning vegan? And they go on to say, quote, even though concerns about animal and environmental exploitation also apply to other animal products such as dairy and egg products, dairy and egg consumers may not immediately link dairy and egg consumption to the killing of animals and believe that there is less suffering in the dairy and egg industry than in the meat industry. This could mean that vegetarians consider their dietary motives and values as more important for meat reduction as compared to dairy and egg reduction. Vegans, on the other hand, seem to apply ethical motives and values more consistently across consumption domains and thus to all animal-sourced foods, and to other consumption or lifestyle domains such as clothing. Therefore, while vegetarians and vegans likely show considerable similarities in motives to reduce or quit meat consumption, they may show meaningful differences in motives to reduce or quit dairy and egg product consumption. From what we just read, it seems as though there could just be a kind of ignorance from vegetarians as to how severe the animal cruelty could be in the dairy and egg industries. That or they're aware of it, but they just can't give up cheese though. Another interesting finding from previous studies comparing vegans and vegetarians that the authors of this paper cite was, quote, compared to vegans, vegetarians tend to identify less strongly with their dietary group, feel less morally obligated to follow their diet, feel less guilt and disgust when thinking about dairy or egg consumption, and are more likely to deny the suffering of animals in the egg and dairy industry. The parts about feeling less guilty and disgust when thinking about eggs and dairy was not surprising to me at all, or even them being more likely to deny the suffering in the dairy and egg industries. But I did find it interesting that vegetarians feel less morally obligated to follow their diet. Presumably, some of these vegetarians abstain from meat for ethical reasons. So for those ones, why would they feel less obligated to follow their diet than vegans? It's almost like vegans have a higher level of moral conviction when it comes to abstaining from meat than vegetarians. This finding would actually confirm a suspicion that many vegans have had concerning vegetarians for a long time, which is that vegans are just better than vegetarians. Jokes aside, it is an interesting finding. I've always felt that if a vegetarian was a vegetarian for ethical reasons, and was sincere about it, and then they were exposed to and thus aware of the cruelty that takes place in the dairy and egg industry, they would then go vegan. And now I'm finding out that vegetarians can feel less morally obligated than vegans to follow their own diet, which they presumably could be following for ethical reasons. So in summary, not only do vegans consume a diet more aligned with animal rights than vegetarians, but so-called ethical vegetarians who presumably abstain from consuming meat for ethical reasons feel less of a moral obligation to do so than vegans who abstain from meat for ethical reasons. We're just better. Anyway, this study had two main goals. The first goal is to investigate the similarities and differences between vegetarians and vegans in health, environmental, and animal rights motivations for reducing or quitting meat consumption and reducing or quitting dairy and egg consumption. The second goal is to compare the moral and social psychological factors associated with dietary motives between both groups and whether those factors can explain the potential differences in dietary motives between the two groups. In vetting the participants in the study, the authors excluded self-identified vegetarians who claimed to have eaten meat in the last 3 months, and self-identified vegans who claimed to have eaten meat, fish, dairy, or egg products in the last 3 months. Because honey wasn't included, this makes me wonder if any vegans who claim that honey is vegan were included in the study. But reading further down the study, I did see that after providing informed consent, the participants were asked to complete a survey, and at the end of it, they were asked to identify which dietary group they were in. The description of the vegan dietary group included not consuming honey, so probably forget about what I said. After vetting, the authors ended up with 2 very demographically similar groups, together making up 517 people. There were 182 vegetarians and 335 vegans. This is what the authors aim to measure. I'm going to read the top 5 and define the ones that don't seem that intuitive. The bottom 6 just aim to measure ethical, environmental, and health motivations for reducing meat, dairy, and egg consumption. So number 1 is moral concern for animals. Don't think I need to define that. Number 2 is human supremacy beliefs. For this one, the participants completed the 6-item human supremacy belief scale. For example, they would have to give a 1 for strongly disagree, all the way up to 7 for strongly agree, for the statement, quote, "The life of an animal is just not of equal value as the life of a human being." I'm not sure I like this question. I don't think you need to value humans and animals equally to be a vegan. You just need to believe that, exploiting and killing either for a sandwich is wrong. Maybe they should have asked, would you consider it ethical to humans who were trait equalized to cows for milk? Number 3, veganism threat. On the same 1 to 7 scale, participants had to rate the following 2 statements. Quote, "Eating dairy or egg products is part of our cultural habits and identity, and some people should be more respectful to that." In other words, we should respect cows because culture or something. The second statement is, quote, "The rise of veganism poses a threat to our country's cultural customs." The next measure was social support for plant-based diets. The statements to rate were, quote, "I think that the important people in my life are supportive of a vegan diet," and, quote, "I know several vegans in my widest circle of friends," and extended findings. Last measure was barriers to plant-based diets. Now, onto the results. Both groups for reduction in the consumption of meat, dairy, and eggs found animal rights as a more important motivation than the environment and health. And both groups found the environment to be a more important motivation than health. And straight from the paper, quote, "Different from the pattern for vegetarians, vegans did not show a significant difference between meat reduction and dairy/egg reduction motives in terms of importance of animal rights and environmental motives." As you can see from this chart, the vegetarians clearly did. Because why would you be ethically motivated to not support this when you care about animal rights? Vegetarians are awesome. Continuing, quote, "Specifically, with respect to meat reduction motives, vegetarians and vegans did not significantly differ in the importance of health and environmental reasons for meat reduction. But vegans versus vegetarians found animal rights significantly more important as a meat reduction motive." So even when it came to not eating meat, vegans were more ethically motivated than vegetarians. In other words, we are indeed morally superior. And now onto the psychological and contextual factors section. Vegans scored higher on moral concern for animals, no surprise there. Vegetarians scored higher for human supremacy beliefs, also no surprise there. Vegetarians scored higher for veganism threat. Vegans scored higher on social support for plant-based diets. And vegetarians scored higher on barriers to plant-based diets. After digging deep into the supplementary material of the study, we found that their main barrier was cheese though. Just kidding. Now, in regards to whether these psychological and contextual factors measured can explain why vegetarians and vegans differ in their dietary motives, the authors conducted a mediation analysis with the dietary groups vegan and vegetarian as independent variables and these psychological and contextual factors as mediators, and then the motivations for reducing meat, dairy, and eggs as the dependent variable. Straight from the authors, the results of these models shows that the higher moral concern for animals, lower human supremacy beliefs, and lower veganism threat predicted higher scores on animal rights motives for both meat, dairy, and egg reduction. Furthermore, dietary group had significant indirect effects on animal rights motives for meat reduction via moral concern for animals, human supremacy beliefs, and veganism threat, as well as on animal rights motives for dairy/egg reduction via moral concern for animals, human supremacy beliefs, and veganism threat. These findings indicate that vegetarians versus vegans, lower moral concern for animals, higher human supremacy beliefs, and higher veganism threat, partly explained or statistically mediated vegetarians' lower scores on animal rights motives for meat and dairy/egg reduction, which was in line with the author's hypothesis 2b. In other words, vegetarians not caring about animals as much as vegans, and having higher human supremacy scores than vegans, might explain why they can't be as morally superior as us vegans and abstain fully from all, animal exploitation and murder for meat, cheese, eggs, etc. Amazing. Just to be clear, there was a lot I did not cover in this paper. If I did, this video would be extremely long, but please read the entire paper if you're interested. It was an awesome read. I'm going to end the video by reading the conclusion section of this paper, which I think summarizes the findings and implications amazingly. The current findings highlight the importance of animal rights motives and pro-animal views underpinning plant-based diets. For this reason, it could be argued that advocates for plant-based diets should focus primarily on trying to increase people's concern for animals and animal rights. This is consistent with meta-analytic evidence suggesting that interventions appealing to animal welfare tend to be particularly effective in increasing intentions to reduce meat consumption. As people might be less aware of harm inflicted on dairy cows and layer hens in dairy and egg industries, making people aware of this would likely help with increasing their willingness to reduce dairy and egg product consumption. However, similar to how meat eaters often willfully ignore or deny the suffering or sentience of animals slaughtered for meat, recent findings indicated that dairy consumers, including vegetarians, may also deny the suffering of animals in the dairy and egg industry. To address this issue, future research could investigate simultaneously consumer motives to reduce dairy and egg consumption, as well as their use of justification strategies that help alleviate the moral discomfort that arises from dairy and egg consumption. The current findings uniquely extend existing research on dietary motives by demonstrating meaningful differences between vegetarians and vegans in their dietary motives and key moral, psychological, and contextual factors that are associated with these motives. Whereas past research has largely focused on motives to reduce or quit meat consumption, vegetarian motives, we moved beyond this approach by also investigating motives to reduce or quit dairy and egg products, vegan motives. The findings highlight the importance of distinguishing between vegetarians and vegans and help with understanding why vegetarians have quit eating meat but still eat other animal products as compared to vegans who have quit eating all animal products. This may help with addressing calls from scientists for a global shift toward plant-based diets, as it can inform policymakers and advocates in their efforts to change animal product consumption and the development of education programs. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. What have we learned in this video and from this study? Vegans are just superior to vegetarians. We all knew it, but now we have some scientific research to support the notion. Thank you so much for watching. If you support my work and want to get early access to it, you can click the link in the pinned comment and support me on Patreon. And if you don't know, I do have a book going over most, if not all, of the anti-vegan arguments you're going to hear online. If you want to get that as well, that'll be linked in the pinned comment. Lastly, there are 2 links below for vegan protein powder and vegan merch, both of which, if you purchase, will help support the channel. And I'll see you in the next video.
Dude,
fuck off. I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,